So the artist wound and self-doubt, and again, this is coming from some of my work as a trauma therapist. I bring all of it into my coaching, but this is referring to a point in your life at which you did creative work or tried to, and someone or something rejected it, didn't think it was good enough. Maybe it was your interpretation of how they received it, but at that point, you internalized a negative core belief about yourself. And it was, I'm not good enough, or my work's not good enough. If I'm not perfect, I'm not lovable. If this isn't perfect, there's no point in doing it, right? So these core beliefs can actually stop us in our tracks. And so the artist wound refers to, and maybe for some people they have multiple ones, but it really refers to this idea that when someone wounded you, or you interpreted something and it wounded you, you felt rejected or abandoned or whatever it was in that moment, your work was not received, or you were rejected, or you didn't feel successful. That is the pivotal moment at which resistance took hold, because it got the opportunity to say, okay, you're right, you're not good enough. So what's the point of even trying? And I highlight, following this self-doubt and artist wound, which is also a form of resistance, because we're talking about resistance as well, this step-by-step process on how to start to challenge those core beliefs. And in order for you to challenge the beliefs that come up around your artist wound, or whatever it is that comes up, is to actually identify what your inner critic is saying to you, and to replace those statements with affirmations, okay? So I talked about in the beginning this idea that, like, I figured out the reason it was so hard for me to sit down and do the work, continue to use the novel as an example, is because when I would sit down, all of these negative core beliefs would come up, and they would just like harpoon, right? Like the negative critic, the negative inner critic would just start talking and saying all these negative core beliefs. What's the point? You're not good enough. Your grammar sucks. Whatever it is, your teacher said X, Y, and Z. You weren't good enough. Your teacher made fun of your writing because they said, is it even reality what you're talking about? It sounds so weird. Maybe they didn't receive it well. But the point is identifying these negative core beliefs about yourself that you hold to be true and starting to challenge those with affirmations. And I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but when you really look at those beliefs that you hold, and then you actually sit down and start to figure out, what affirmations could I write that I actually could believe, right? You don't want to use affirmations that aren't going to work, things that are just so absurd or outlandish that you're not going to receive them. They need to be things that are going to work for you, right? So an example I use, the inner critic might tell you I'm inadequate, and an affirmation for that might say I'm worthy. The inner critic might say I'm a disappointment, and the affirmation might be I'm learning to finish what I start, right? It gives you some space, and it's believable to you. And so what we want to do is we want to outline this so that when you do sit down to do the work, you have this in mind. You already know what your negative core beliefs are, and then you now have affirmations to start to challenge those when they come up. But if affirmations don't work for you, or that isn't enough, the next thing is to create a mantra, right? And one of my favorites is written in the journal: what is meant for me comes to me. What is not meant for me goes. And you can come up with any mantra. Maybe you have a favorite, maybe you don't, to challenge those negative core beliefs. Again, if you don't like using mantras, the next exercise that I put in here is the idea of drawing or writing about a positive figure in your life. And I think that sometimes it's really hard for us. I talked about being a trauma therapist, and for some people, their backgrounds their childhoods have been so traumatic that they can't even think of a positive figure. But I want to challenge you to either think of a positive figure or make one up, right? Like, you can make up your own hero. And as you get into the journal, it talks a little bit more about what that looks like, to come up with your own creativity and your own positive support person that you get to conjure up and use imagery, because imagery does work, to start to challenge these beliefs as they come up, okay?